Hey, what's up everyone? How's it going? This is Watch, and in this video we'll be doing a direct head-to-head smartwatch comparison between one of my favorite Google Android Wear devices, the Asus Zenwatch, which comes at a really affordable price tag, versus the brand new Apple Watch Sport, which is actually the cheapest version of the Apple Watch. So if you're interested in seeing what the major differences are between the two, and perhaps what advantages the Apple Watch presents, again, the Asus Zenwatch, or vice versa, this is a perfect video for you. So without any further ado, let's get right in this comparison and see which watch comes out on top. Now, looking at these two side by side, you can see that there is a fairly similar overall look in terms of the design philosophy. I'm not sure if there was some influence that bled into designing the Asus Zenwatch, if Asus took a look at what the Apple Watch was going to look like and kind of planned ahead, or it might be just an original design that they look. In both cases, both watches look fantastic, and they both have a fairly similar overall form factor and shape. Now, that being said, in terms of exact measurements, the Asus Zenwatch is actually a little bit larger than the Apple Watch, even if you get the 42mm version, and you can see the measurements over here to illustrate that point. In terms of thickness and weight, the 38mm of the Apple Watch that we have is actually a little bit thicker and a little bit heavier than the Asus Zenwatch, measuring with 10.5mm versus 7.9mm on the Asus side, and in terms of weight, it is quite a bit heavier, even if you get the sports band with the 30mm version of the Apple Watch. So in that case, even though that the Asus might be a little bit larger in terms of its overall footprint, because it's so light and thin, you really don't notice the difference between the two once both are in your hand. And in terms of comfort, they're pretty much identical. You can wear them all day without any fatigue or any kind of discomfort. Plus, the straps themselves are pretty comfortable inherently to wear as well. Now, speaking of straps, basically on the Apple Watch side, you can get a whole bunch of different straps from Apple themselves. There are a couple of different third-party manufacturers making straps for them, and you can even adapt different straps if you buy some of these adapters that are out there. We'll have a video on the channel explaining that in more detail, but essentially, if you want to get the proper straps, you have to go through Apple, and the straps are fairly expensive. The one that I would recommend is actually the sports strap that we have that comes with the Apple Watch Sport Edition. It's very comfortable in the hand. It's fairly weather resistant, also sweat resistant, so it's great for any kind of activity, and very easy to adjust in terms of getting the right fit for your wrist as well. Now, the strap that comes with the basic model of the Asus Zenwatch is very nice as well. It has kind of a leather kind of feel towards it, and it's definitely very comfortable, very traditional looking strap that you'd find in some kind of sports watch or something like that. So if you did want a different strap, thankfully you do have quite a bit of options out there online, and we'll have some links in the description listing off some of my favorite straps for the Asus Zenwatch, but it's a lot more universal in terms of its interchangeability. Perhaps the process of swapping out different straps isn't as elegant as the Apple Watch, which has that magnetic latching system, but again, the strap options on the Asus are definitely going to be a little bit more affordable than what we have on the Apple side. Now, let's talk durability. Basically, both of these two watches are water resistant to some extent. The Asus has IP55 certification, so you can easily dip it in shallow waters for about 30 or 40 seconds without having any issues. And the same thing goes for the Apple Watch. You can fully submerge the device in a body of water for several minutes without having to worry at all. Now, in terms of the scratch resistant capabilities, basically it depends on which Apple Watch you get. If you get some of the Apple Watches that have the sapphire crystal glass, it's pretty much indestructible, although you can still scratch it and break it, but it takes a lot of force. Very, very unlikely to happen from a day-to-day experience. Now, if you get the more inexpensive options like we did with the Apple Watch Sport, it basically has ion strengthened glass, similar glass that you find on your iPhone or your iPad, so fairly scratch resistant to some extent, but again, it is possible to scratch it up if you put significant amount of force, and it's not as durable as the sapphire crystal glass. Now, on the Zenwatch side, it's using Corning Gorilla Glass 3 technology, so it's fairly durable and pretty much the same extent as the ion strengthening glass on the Apple Watch Sport. So probably not as good as the sapphire crystal glass, but pretty good nonetheless. Now, the way you control the Asus Zenwatch and the Apple Watch are fairly similar. They're pretty much like every other smartwatch, with the exception that the Apple Watch, of course, has that digital crown interface, which, if you haven't heard already, I'm a pretty big fan of. It's a fantastic interface for doing minor, small adjustments in the operating system or on specific apps. It's also a great input device. Now, the primary mode of control on the Asus side is voice, using the OK Google, or, of course, using the capacitive touchscreen, which is fairly standard for many Google Android Wear devices. Of course, one of the cool things about the new Apple Watch is that it not only does it have a capacitive touchscreen, but it's also force sensitive. Much in the same vein as that we've seen in the new MacBook trackpads, you can apply some more force than you would typically will, and you can enable third click functions. This is how you change the watch interface, and different apps will allow you to do different things with the pressure and sensitivity. So it's definitely a cool and unique way to control and get more out of the interface on the Apple Watch side. Now, in terms of button placements and ergonomics, the Apple Watch, I really have no complaints. All the buttons are arranged where you think they should be, and they're very easy to use and fairly tactile. The Asus Zenwatch doesn't really have any buttons except for the little tiny power standby button that's located kind of at the side and back of the device. Very inconveniently located and pretty hard to press and access. So this is probably one of my biggest gripes on the Asus Zenwatch in terms of its design. I wish they actually had a side button like a normal smartwatch, but sadly that's not the case. You have to deal with this small little tiny button at the back. Now, move forward in terms of displays. The Asus Zenwatch is actually really good in terms of this factor. Both, in fact, are using organic LED technologies, so they can both reproduce very vibrant colors, and that stuff looks very, very saturated, and the black levels are, of course, completely infinite, which is always nice to see on any smartphone or smartwatch device. In terms of resolution, the Asus measures about 320 by 320. It has a PPI count of about 278 versus the 38mm of the Apple Watch that we have is about 340 by 272, and that has a PPI count about 290. So a little bit higher pixel density on the Apple Watch side, and of course, in terms of brightness, it's a little bit brighter as well, so a little bit better to use in outdoor conditions. Although the Asus isn't bad if you turn up the brightness to its maximum setting. Now, in terms of the internal specifications, both are adequately powered based on their operating system. Our Asus is using a Qualcomm quad-core Snapdragon 400 chip. That's a quad-core processor that's clocked about 1.2 gigahertz. That has 512 megabytes of RAM, about 4 gigabytes of internal memory. Fairly standard for most Google Android Wear devices. Now, the Apple Watch is obviously using a custom chip and interface using Apple's own S1 processor and the Power VR chip for all the GPU processing. It has actually 8 gigabytes of internal memory, so a little bit more capabilities in terms of how many apps you can load on the Apple Watch compared to the Asus Zenwatch, but that may or may not be a big deal for some of you guys out there. Now, moving on, let's talk about the sensors we have on both of these two devices. Now, the Apple Watch is fairly fully loaded. It has accelerometers, compass, gyroscopes, ambient light sensor, and of course the optical heart rate monitor. Now, on the Asus side, we have pretty much all those other things except a heart rate monitor. But what you gain is a price cut. One of the reasons why the Asus is so aggressively priced is they don't have to fit an optical heart rate monitor, and you get basically a decent amount of discount because of that. So if you don't need that, and perhaps you're looking for a smartwatch on kind of a budget, the Asus might be the right choice for you. Plus, of course, you're going to be interested in the Asus if you're an existing Android user. One of the issues you're going to have when selecting the Apple Watch is the fact that you're going to be fairly dedicated to the Apple ecosystem. So you need to have an iPhone 5 or newer running 8.2 or newer as well. Versus the Asus, you can pretty much fit to any Android device that's running Android 4, KitKat, or newer. So that's thousands of devices out there, making this a little bit more convenient and compatible, and certainly more flexible in terms of how many things and devices it can support straight off the bat. Perhaps another deciding factor is going to be the app selection. Obviously, we're running two completely different platforms. In terms of maturity, Google Android Wear has been out for quite a while now, and the apps library is growing, but there's still not really any killer apps that you need need to have besides the one that come with your Apple Watch for basic notifications and things like that. And of course, that's going to be a dilemma that you're going to face with pretty much every smartwatch device, because it's really a conduit towards your smartphone. And the same thing goes for the Apple Watch, although there's some really interesting applications that are in the works right now, and some that definitely have a lot of potential. But at the end of the day, both of these two devices are an accessory to your smartphone, and something that is a glorified timekeeping device. Now, last but not least, let's talk about the battery performance that you can expect from both these two smartwatches. Now, you can obviously go by the manufacturer specification, but that really means nothing in real life. What I did to test out both of them is I used them for a couple of days, about 7 to 8 days, and I just did my average daily routine of checking my notifications, using them to do certain different activities, and I basically measured the average amount of hours I got on each battery life. And I averaged all those hours up, and here is the results. Basically, after a couple of days, I got about 10 hours 19 minutes on my Apple Watch Sport, which is the 38mm version, and the Asus Zenwatch did do a little bit better at 13 hours 17 minutes. So on average, you can definitely expect to see a little bit better battery life on the Asus Zenwatch, mainly because you don't have to deal with many of the heart rate monitor stuff that the Apple Watch will measure your heart rate throughout the day. Of course, you can turn that feature off and use it more conservatively, but again, it really depends on how you're going to use the smartwatch. But generally speaking, the Apple Watch is kind of the lower end of spectrum in terms of battery performance compared to the many other smartwatches you're going to get. But for some people, that's not really that big of a deal, because they're going to charge their smartwatch pretty much every day. Now, lastly, one of the biggest highlights of the Asus Zenwatch for me is certainly its price point. At under $200 is probably one of the most affordable smartwatches that you can get, besides some of the Pebble watches that are also available. And compared to the $349 asking price that the Apple Watch Sport comes with, it's certainly a bargain when you take a look at some of the overlapping features. Sure, it doesn't have a heart rate monitor, but it does pretty much everything that you would expect a smartwatch to do these days, which is certainly worth it when it comes to the overall price point that it comes in at. In terms of the Apple Watch, for me personally, one of my favorite aspects about it is its control and navigation system and its OS. It's an extremely fluid and dynamic experience that works perfectly in the Apple ecosystem, and if you're part of that, it's kind of a no-brainer for people that are looking for a smartwatch to go perfectly with their iPhone. But other than that, guys, that's really it. Make sure to leave a comment down below letting me know on which smartwatch you guys would prefer, which one has the most to offer in terms of value and everything like that. Check out the links in the description down below where you'll find specific Amazon links, and if you go through any of our links, it gives us a little bit of kickback. Doesn't cost you anything extra, but it helps make videos like this possible. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you later. Take care.